Natalie, they just called me from the ministry. They have the same problem as me. So I gave them your mobile number, please. You get a call.
I see that people are joining, keep joining the webinar, so we will allow a couple of more minutes for people to join and then we can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Jorgala, and I work for the Cyprus Organization for Standardization. And I will be moderating today's webinar, ISO 32210, the first ISO standard on sustainable finance, assess ESG considerations. On behalf of CYS, we would like to offer a warm welcome to everyone joining us today, and thank you for your participation. We have over 250 registered participants for this webinar, which proves that the finance community recognizes the need to support a transition to sustainable finance. We just have a few housekeeping points before we launch into our presentation. This is a listen-only webinar that is being recorded. Please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A feature. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please submit them in the Q&A section, and our technical support team will assist you accordingly. You will also be prompted to complete a short survey at the end, if you wish to do so, and provide your feedback on today's webinar. We will provide you with a link to the webinar's recording and presentations upon completion of the webinar. So without further ado, I will introduce now Mrs. Athina Panagiottou, our Director General for the Cyprus Organization for Standardization, who will now commence the webinar. Mrs. Athina, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's always very exciting to see so many people in any type of informative seminar. A few years ago, the word sustainability was never next to the word finance. And we in standards, we were starting a few years ago to develop the new procedures, the new processes, the new standardization work, and we were wondering whether or not it would catch up. So we are very happy today to see that you're all here to learn about the standards in the field of sustainable finance, to learn about the work that it's being done by experts in the field, and we're very honored to have some of them here with us today. I hope in about an hour you'll have a better view of what these standards are, how they can help you, how you can use them as tools. And we at the Cyprus Organization for Standardization, we are always here for anyone to reach out to us and to give you the information. We're also looking forward to more people being involved in standardization in the field of sustainable finance. Thank you for being here. I hope today you listen to everything you've been experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Panagiottou. Due to an unforeseen obligation abroad, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Konstantinos Petridis, will not be able to join us today. In his place, we welcome Mrs. Irini Piki, Economic Director, Directorate of Strategy, Coordination and Communication at the Ministry of Finance. Before passing the word to Mrs. Piki, we would like to thank her for joining us today in such a short notice. Mrs. Piki, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Natalie. Welcome, everybody. First of all, allow me to convey the apologies of the Minister for not being able to be with us, but he's on a mission with the President, but he would like to convey his wish for a fruitful meeting on such a topical matter. It is a great honor for me to participate in this webinar on ISO Standard of Sustainable Finance. And allow me, first of all, to thank the organizing committee. I mean, climate change is today a reality that concerns us all and affects our environment, our societies, and our quality of life. The last 2 years, we have witnessed catastrophic forest fires in Southern Europe, and at the same time, Central and North Europe were faced with deadly floods. I mean, all over the planet, we have extreme weather events that are becoming more and more frequent. The COVID pandemic, on the other hand, a crisis of unprecedented magnitude, caused serious disruptions on the world economy and society, and highlighted the importance of planetary health. If the planet is not healthy, nor will human and other beings be. To tackle both the consequences and the causes, international cooperation is paramount because no country can meet this challenge, this threat alone. The Paris Climate Agreement and the European Green Deal are the compass for a more sustainable future. And in 2019, the Commission presented the European Green Deal, a growth strategy that aims to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. In September 2020, the Commission presented the Climate Target Plan for 2030, Fit for 55, with the aim of reducing emissions by 55% by 2030. To achieve this, we need to invest around 350 billion more each year over the decade 2021-2030. The scale of this investment challenge exceeds the potential of the public sector alone, and the financial sector, in particular sustainable finance, have a key role to play in achieving these targets. But what do we mean by sustainable finance? Merely the integration of sustainability considerations, the integration of environmental, social, and governance practices in the financing of economic activities. Sustainable finance is understood as funding to support economic growth while reducing environmental pressures and taking into account social and governance aspects. Sustainable finance can play a key role in achieving the goals of the EU that I already mentioned by channeling private investment into a climate neutral and equitable economy as a complement to public investment. To this end, the Commission has since 2018 been developing a comprehensive policy agenda on sustainable finance, comprising of the Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth and the new strategy for financing the transition to sustainable economy. Let me now mention very briefly a number of EU initiatives that are relevant, I think, to our discussion on sustainable finance. First of all, the taxonomy regulation. In order to achieve the EU's climate and energy targets, it is vital to focus investment on sustainable projects and activities. Achieving this requires a common language and a clear definition of what is sustainable. The taxonomy regulation establishes a framework for determining whether an economic activity classifies as environmentally sustainable. Moreover, it requires financial and non-financial companies to provide information to investors about the environmental performance of their assets and economic activities. Secondly, the disclosure regulation, which was published as part of the Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth in 2019, and establishes sustainability reporting obligations for financial product makers and financial advisors to final investors. It does so in relation to the integration of sustainability risks by participants in financial markets and financial advisors in all investment processes. Thirdly, the Green Bond Standard, which will be a voluntary gold standard for green bonds. Use of the standard will enable companies and public bodies to more easily raise large-scale financing for climate and environmentally friendly investments. Being an active EU member state, the government of Cyprus, and especially the Ministry of Finance, have green economy very high in its priorities. In the context of our commitment to a more sustainable and greener economy, we're in the process of preparing for the issuance of a green or sustainable bond, which will allow the effective financing for the transition of Cyprus to a greener economy. We're also looking into the formulation of a greener budget, and we're exploring the introduction of a fiscally neutral carbon tax. Ladies and gentlemen, tackling climate crisis is a long-lasting process, which needs swift and immediate action at the same time. That's why, to respond effectively, we need to utilize all the available tools and also develop new approaches. In this age of quick transition that we live in, standards have indeed an important role to play in order to guide organizations and at the same time create clarity and transparency for all stakeholders. ISO 33210 is a pivotal instrument in this policy mix, with the optimal goal of financing sustainable growth, the green economy, social projects, in other words, everything that constitutes towards achieving the ESG goals. Thank you, and I will now give the floor to the experts in the field and listen to what they have to say about this very important standard for our planet. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Piggy. Now we would like to introduce Dr. Peter Young, who is the chair of the ISO Technical Committee 322 Sustainable Finance. Dr. Young has spent many years working with businesses and governments on sustainability issues. He believes in the role of standards to promote sustainability and chairs the International Standards Organization Committee on Sustainable Finance, ISO Technical Committee 322, and the Strategic Advisory Group for the equivalent UK program. Dr. Young, please.
Thank you, Natalie. I will now share my screen. And also thank you very much to Mrs. Irene Piki for setting out the extensive policy agenda that is already underway. I would absolutely agree with her that we are underway on a quick transition, and we will need a lot more clarity and transparency to bring the private sector finance that we need to achieve all our goals, to achieve sustainability and climate action. So you're all very welcome from me. I want to just introduce the organization ISO, our own committee, which has the number 322 on sustainable finance, as a way into the specific discussion about the new standard, which is currently out for consultation and is the main focus today. So introducing ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, formed back in the late 1940s. It's an independent, non-governmental organization with a global network of national standard bodies. It's well established at proving consensus building and is very extensive in its membership. As you can see there, 165 countries are actively involved. And in that sense, it is a fantastic platform for developing standards with true global utilization. And it is that global reach which led to the decision to form a new committee. Relatively recently, we had our first plenary meeting only just under 3 years ago on sustainable finance. ISO had a long history of providing standards in areas, for example, like greenhouse gas accounting and environmental management, but had no focus particularly on the needs of sustainable finance, and that was the purpose of our committee. We have a strategic business plan which gives a lot more detail for those of you who are interested in what the scope of our work is, but I want to just introduce some of the basic points and also emphasize that we are growing. We are keen to see more countries join us, but we have 25 participating and 18 the observers in orange there. And we have many external liaison members, which include everything from governmental organizations like the European Commission, regulators like the European Environment Agency, but also alliances of the private sector, such as the Global Alliance on Banking and Values and the Impact Investing Institute, and other organizations from NGOs and the third sector. We also lead within our committee, TC 322 on sustainable finance, the contributions that ISO make to many of the other international initiatives. For example, you may have heard about the development of an international sustainability standards board by the international organization of the accountants, IFRS, and the task force for nature-related financial disclosures, which is being developed along the same model of the established task force on climate-related financial disclosures. All of these need to be aligned, and we will talk more about how we believe that ISO can play a key role in aligning all of these initiatives together. Our brief is standardization in the field of sustainable finance to integrate sustainability considerations, including ESG practices in the financing of economic activities. My point here is really it's a very broad remit, but we do see sustainable finance is not just achieving the climate goals that we need and other environmental goals, such as stopping nature's depletion, but also the social, economic and governance goals, which form all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and which constitute sustainable development as it was originally defined. The sustainable finance ecosystem is a pretty large and complicated beast. This is how we see it, and in particular on the right-hand side, you see the enabling functions which allow this ecosystem, this business system to operate. And we think standards are a key component of that. Mrs. Irene Piki has already mentioned that they have a role here to play, alongside having good quality data, reporting on ESG matters, and the other supporting functions, including innovations such as in Fintech. These are the enabling functions, and this is where our work is designed to make a contribution. On the left-hand side, from 2 to 9, you see all of the different players that allow products to be developed to meet the demands through intermediaries and through supply to allow capital to flow for sustainable outcomes. And then you have the governance of that process through policy and regulation, which is the role of government and regulators. And you have the supporting market infrastructure and, of course, the stakeholders who ultimately hold the whole system to account in terms of those sustainable outcomes. That's how we would see the sustainable finance ecosystem, but in particular, how standards can contribute right across that whole ecosystem. So our rationale, I said that there are a lot of initiatives, and we have some of those listed below, some of the organizations who have already published and intend to publish guidance, information, maybe even standards, regulations, which will support the transition towards sustainable finance. What we are talking about today is an umbrella standard, which we think provides some of the core information, which all of those initiatives can be slotted into, but in an organized fashion, rather than in the rather disparate fashion in which we see current initiatives. It is good to see so many organizations responding to the needs for sustainable finance, but it's not always helpful for all those working in the market to have so many noises about how things should be done or might be done, or ideas of implementation. We need to bring that into a much more coherent, calm, and organized structure. And that is the role that we believe that ISO and the work in our committee can assist in. In terms of broad activities, we see stewardship, management and governance, assurance and verification, transparency and disclosure, and impact assessment as the 4 key activities by which you can judge the outcomes and the influence of applying finance to deliver sustainable outcomes. And then you have that operating at fundamentally 2 levels: the organizational level, the financial institution, if you like, which is operating, which can indeed be a public sector one as well as a private sector or third sector, but we are particularly focused on the private sector because that is where the bulk of the finance must come from. And at the product level, that is to say, at the actual product which is being offered to the market, which is where aspects like labeling can come in. So we deliver our core work through 5 main internal activities. We collaborate with many other ISO committees in finance, asset management, governance, environmental performance, social responsibility. We're going to talk much more about the framework standards, so I'm going to pass over that. We did publish a terminology guide, and that's been available since August of last year. We bring experts along to provide joint input with other standards. Mrs. Irene Peaky mentioned green bonds, and there are a series of standards on green debt instruments, which are helping to align the market in the way she described. And we contribute to harmonization and alignment in the way I was describing earlier, as well as reaching out to new countries. But we also bring our experience to international activities. And this is just a list of recent things. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it is something that you can refer to after, but brings home the importance of connecting ISO's work with so many other organizations at a very high level, including the G20 and the UNFCCC Race to Zero work, where we're just starting a working group on sustainable finance. The next steps for us, I just want to take a last minute on that. We want to encourage dialogue and input. And so, of course, you joining us today and listening to what we have to say, and I hope following up by looking at this draft international standard, you can help us. We need to reach out to a big community on a global basis. We want to develop further standards, and we encourage experts to join us. So if these subject areas in 1 to 4 are of interest to you, then do get in touch with CYS and you can get involved. And we also want to ensure this International Sustainability Standards Board is set up in a way which reflects the breadth of its new responsibilities, and to ensure that it builds mutual support with the work that we do at ISO. So thank you very much for your attention. I will now pass you back to Natalie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Young. Now we would like to introduce Mr. Hayden Morgan, who is the convener of the working group with ISO Technical Committee 322 Sustainable Finance. Mr. Morgan is the convener of the draft ISO standard 32210, the Sustainable Finance Standard. He is founder and director of Morgan Green Advisory, especially sustainable finance consultancy, advising development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, private equity fund managers, and pension funds. Mr. Morgan was instrumental at the setup of the UK Green Investment Bank later group, where he designed, implemented, and maintained the Green ESG framework as director from 2013 till 2020. Mr. Morgan, please.
Thank you for that introduction, Natalie, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. So good afternoon. Let me just share my slides. Hopefully we can set that up. All right, so thanks again for CYS for the invitation to speak today, and also to Mrs. Irene Pinky for that great introduction in terms of setting out the crucial context of sustainable finance and the role that financial organizations can make in the contribution towards the global goals, whether that's climate or wider ESG. And in terms of the various initiatives that Cyprus is also undertaking, that's really great to hear. And hopefully today we can outline some of the sort of tools and approaches that can help contribute to implementation towards some of the meeting some of those goals, and in terms of some of the regulatory drivers as well, in the context of application in Cyprus. So as Natalie mentioned, it's my great pleasure to be convening this work around ISO 32210, which is the Sustainable Finance Standard. Today I'm going to introduce you to the standard itself, how we've developed the standard, some of the benefits of applying the standard, the contents of the standard itself, and then around some of the practical application of best practice guidance, and then an invitation to participate in the future development of the standard. It's reached a crucial stage at the moment, and it'll be great to get your involvement as well. So just moving on. So as Peter mentioned, actually, the ISO is a consensus-driven platform for development of trusted and transparent processes, resulting in standards which are often used actually for pseudo-regulation. Why is this important? Because in some regimes, the regulation is not maybe as strict, or there may be oversight from the regulators which are not as robust. This standard helps in terms of global application of these requirements. Because it is that global approach, it is the ideal platform for sustainable finance in meeting our global challenges. So that's where ISO is of real benefit here. The actual standard itself is ISO 32210, Sustainable Finance Principles and Guidance. We've been working on this for 3 years. We've had hundreds of experts from over 25 countries contributing to the work of the standard. We've had thousands of comments. We've had to go through, consider each one individually, work it into the standard, or agree a way forward. We've held over 15 meetings, often for up to 4 or 5 days at each time, plus numerous subgroups and sub-editing committees and meetings to work through. This has resulted in 7 principles, which are actually core to the standard. Some of the benefits of applying the standard. As we've heard, the financial sector is absolutely crucial to enable this sustainable transition. We've heard around the requirements of public and private sector investment, which is estimated to be over $1 trillion per year required to meet the goals. The standard supports at the organizational level to integrate sustainability governance, and it enables access to new market opportunities. It adds value to investments, and it helps with risk management. So it helps organizations contribute towards this additional investment required. One of the key aspects where we see real clear benefit is the transition towards a more sustainable, greener economy. It potentially helps real added value in terms of accessing opportunities presented by that transition. It helps support both profitability in organizations, but also sustainability. The standard has got clear definitions around risk and how to integrate risk into operations, products, and services. And it helps also with stakeholder engagement and aligning stakeholder interests to organizational operations. It also provides clear clarity and transparency around the assessment, management, and reporting. Again, key themes that we've heard are so important in the transition to a more sustainable economy. It covers all dimensions of sustainability. So it's environmental, social, governance, and holistic approach to consider all those different aspects. And it enables confidence and reassurance to market participants and key stakeholders. I will also focus on cohesion here, because there was various sort of regulations mentioned around the EU taxonomy for sustainable activities, the disclosure regulations that are coming in at the EU, and also I think at the Cyprus level, and also around the sovereign green bond, which was mentioned earlier. the standard helps around cohesion of all different initiatives and regulation. And I mentioned also there TCFD and various other initiatives around the principles for responsible investment and the new emerging financial regulation. It also sets out some good practice, which we'll come on and discuss in the later half of my presentation. And as I say, helps with transparency. That is one of the core aspects of this, to eliminate greenwashing. Greenwashing is becoming a significant issue, whether that's a legal issue or whether that's through stakeholder misunderstanding or misrepresentation. The standard helps alleviate greenwashing. We are also proposing a slightly novel aspect to the application of this standard, whereby we hope to have a repository of global best practice and good practice held on our ISO website, which will have an inventory of all other initiatives and regulation and other good practice, which will help users of the standard implement all these good practice initiatives to ensure that the standard maintains its relevance. So rather than include all the other initiatives in the standard itself, they're separately used on the website, and there's a dynamic repository there. So there's some of the key benefits. In terms of the actual scope itself, it focuses on what is material to that organization. And why is that important? Because it's important to understand what influence and what impact that organization has. And it's also applicable right from strategy, organizational strategy, right through to products and services. It's also applicable throughout all activities throughout the organization as well. And in terms of organizational type, again, it's agnostic. So it can be applied for lending, for investing, for asset management, or for service providers as well. So it's got broad application throughout financial services. Now, in terms of the contents of the standard itself, there's two key elements I want to pull out and discuss. There's the sustainable finance principles, and we go through those and we go through that figure, and also implementation guidance. So practical tools, templates, and guidance to help implementation. Also, just to flag in section 3 there's terms and definitions, which is defined classification of terms used in the standard itself. So it's not wide sustainable finance terms, it's the terms that are used in the standard to help the user to implement those and understand what those terms are. So just focusing now on the principles. These are the core elements of the sustainable finance standard itself. You'll see on the left there, governance and culture is such an important aspect, and the tone from the top is so important in terms of filtering out through the rest of the organization. Sustainable outcomes are absolutely core, again, in terms of the impact that we wish to achieve in implementation of the standard itself. So enhancing sustainable outcomes, real world outcomes around environmental and social. You'll see there's strategy and objectives and working down, risk and opportunity and impact management, stakeholder engagement, monitoring and measurement, and then core to the whole thing is organizational activities or operations, products and services. Reporting and transparency cuts across everything. And again, that's absolutely crucial. You could add disclosure to that. And then underpinning the whole thing is continual improvement, which supports the enhanced ambitions towards that transition towards a greener, more sustainable economy. So they're the key principles. Also within the standard are some implementation guidance. This is good practice that's been aggregated in or collated throughout the global practice and consolidated here in the standard, which we think would be really useful for organizations to implement. So each principle has its own guidance and good practice. I don't intend to go through now in the interest of time, but you can see there some of the aspects for each of the principles. I will pull out a few. There's some commitments around board level requirements and definitions for accountability and commitment. There's a requirement for a policy to be developed which sets out ambitious goals and objectives, a requirement to integrate risk management and opportunity, and to look at the impact, some guidance around how best to engage with stakeholders in terms of identification of good practice and lagging practice, and to get alignment of interest with their own ambitions. Monitoring and measurement is a core aspect of this in terms of supporting key performance indicators to measure progress against goals and targets. Transparency, as I said, is absolutely core to this. So to demonstrate, again, reporting progress and also performance around some of the key KPIs and metrics. There is also an aspect around assurance. So third-party assurance around alignment with the requirements of the standard. And as I said, continuing ambition, what that looks like, how to integrate it, and then periodic review of performance to increase ambition over time. So some of the key documentation that could be an output of implementation of the guidance, again, this is key tangible outcomes which support demonstration of sustainability. I don't intend to go through each of these, but the standard shows how each of these documents can be used and what are the outputs. Just to pick out a few, there's around definition of the policy, some of the metrics, how to work those through, a systematic review of current organizational practice and a diagnostic as to how that can be improved, a transition plan. So this is such an important aspect of, for example, transitioning from where the organization is today to where it needs to be tomorrow, and potentially an external assurance statement. Again, that's not a requirement of the principles and process, but it is a good practice recommendation. Just before I hand back to Natalie, in terms of some of the application of this, organizations can choose to apply various aspects of the good practice. So it's not a mandatory requirement to integrate all this, and you can cherry pick different aspects of this depending on organizational development. And it can also be aligned with existing operational processes in organizations as well. So it's designed to augment and support existing policy, practices and process, and to, like I say, align with the organizational strategy as well. In terms of some of the key integrational stakeholders, you can see those that potentially may integrate with implementation is all the different internal sort of departments of an organization. It's absolutely core to successful implementation to have this holistic approach which cuts across all the sort of silo defined organizational departments. Sustainability will interface in all aspects of this organization, both vertically and horizontally. So hence why we've flagged a few here in terms of the key roles and internal stakeholders, which will require integration of sustainability and the standard supports in that implementation. So I think that's the end of the standard itself. The only thing I would just recommend in terms of engagement. So if you wish to engage with our committee and our work, then please go through CYS. We've got a current draft of the standard which is out for public consultation. The review period, I think, has been extended from the date here, and I think Mike Hennigan is actually going to give us an update on that. But it's actually a live document ready there for review, ready for comment. So I would recommend, if interested, please get in contact through CYS, and we're very happy to receive your comments there. Also, just to flag, we've got various social media channels where we are looking to increase our activity as we come to market or promote our activities, and especially around the standard. I flagged a few of our websites there, but by all means, please check us out on, like I say, those websites or LinkedIn or YouTube. And again, thanks for CYS for hosting this webinar and supporting in our work. And with that, I'll hand back to Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morgan. Now we would like to introduce Mr. Mike Hennigan, who is the committee manager of the ISO Technical Committee 322 Sustainable Finance, supporting Dr. Peter Young. Mr. Hennigan is also involved with ISO's Committee on Governance, ISO TC 309, and was responsible for the revision process for ISO 14001 environmental management systems. Mr. Hennigan, please.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I'm the committee manager for TC 322, so my role is to ensure that the rules are followed, to support Peter, and also to support the national member bodies that are involved in the committee. So that's very separate from my role as an employee of BSI, the UK national standards body. So I'll just run through a couple of things: how to get involved, what's coming, and some of the challenges and opportunities that we face. CYS is one of the 25 participating members of TC 322, and as in that capacity, CYS can nominate delegates to the TC 322 plenary meeting that usually takes place once a year. CYS is entitled to vote and submit comments at the key stages in our standards development. So the new work item proposals, the committee draft, and the draft international standard. And importantly as well, CYS can nominate experts to participate in any of our groups, our working groups, whether it's or an ad hoc group or a study group. The structure of the committee at the moment, we've got two working groups, one which is led by Hayden. The other is on terminology generally, which is sort of responsible for the terminology standard that Peter mentioned previously. And we've got two other important groups looking at future standards. So the Future Standards Development Ad Hoc Group, and also a technical advisory group on sustainable fintech. And also as part of our structures, we have a chairs advisory group and a communications group. As Hayden was mentioning, the draft international standard 32210 is currently out for ballot and for comment. So although at ISO level the voting closes in April, I think CYS would welcome your comments before then. I'm not exactly sure of the deadline, but they then get processed by CYS before they're submitted. And my deadline for all the national member bodies and our liaison organisations is now the 17th of April. The process is that working group 1, led by Hayden and the experts in that working group, will review all of those comments, produce a final draft, which is balloted again, where CYS and the other national member bodies can approve or disapprove the final draft. That is for editorial comments only, so all the technical aspects must be dealt with in the current process. And then we expect to publish in November of this year. The technical report 32220 covers basic concepts and key initiatives. That was published in August. We're keeping it under review in Working Group 2, and obviously there'll be a close link with the work of Working Group 1 when we look to develop that idea further. We've got some pending standards that will go into the new work item ballot fairly shortly. One on sustainable finance products and services, and then the other, which is on sustainable private equity and venture capital funds, and that we expect slightly later in the year. And there will be an opportunity to comment at the proposal stage, and then obviously we'll go into new working groups to actually develop those standards. Some of these Peter has already mentioned as well, but these are under the Future Standards Development Ad Hoc Group. And this is another area where we really are looking for volunteers to participate, to help with that early development, because we find that if we can get the proposal right, then that makes the whole process much easier and much quicker. And our standards can take anything from sort of 18 months to 3 years to develop. So that the better the proposal, the easier the process. So yes, please, if you're interested in any of these topics, talk to Natalie and see how you can get involved. I also mentioned the technical advisory group on sustainable fintech, and that is looking to integrate fintech with the financial sustainable development. So obviously covering ESG and specific sustainable development goals. It's going to be liaising very closely with some of the other ISO technical committees, such as the Financial Services Committee, TC68, and also a number of external organizations. And, for example, one of the ideas that they're investigating at the moment is maybe something on blockchain green bonds. But again, that's at a very early stage. And, again, one of those areas where if you have expertise in that area, we'd very, very much welcome your involvement. We've got a number of challenges, as you've seen from Peter's presentation. It's such a fast developing area. How can we keep up? We need to ensure that the financial community understands the value that ISO can bring, and our proven consensus building process is well established, and I think we can bring a lot to the table. We do want to get more involvement from developing countries, or which is the ISO term, but what others may call emerging markets. In Asia and Africa and Latin America. You could see from the maps that we're a little bit sparse in those areas, but we really want to encourage their involvement, and also to work with some of the key external liaison organizations, including those that Peter had mentioned previously. And another challenge which is common to ISO is making sure that there's proper coordination with the other ISO technical committees, so that we are aligned with the work that they're doing, and also with existing standards. Of course, it's with the challenge comes an opportunity. ISO is very well placed to fill some of the gaps, and also to provide some clarity where there may otherwise be confusion with so much going on in this area. The developing countries, or those countries in emerging markets, really in ISO have a very good opportunity to influence what is going on in ISO standards, and I think perhaps more than maybe in other organizations. So we think that's a big opportunity for those developing countries, and also ISO getting involved with the new International Sustainability Standards Board, with the Value Reporting Foundation, and with the securities regulators. That they're areas where we can really help in the sort of ESG ecosystem. So you'll see in the slides when you get them that here are some links. So some of those Hayden's already mentioned, but there's also some more information about ISO that hopefully will be useful background for you. And then if you have any comments, please feel free to come to me. But obviously the main route into the ISO committee would be through the National Mirror Committee at CYS, and I think initially probably more helpful to go through Natalie, and she can collate any queries and comments and come to me, and I'd be very happy to help.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hennigan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, we would like to introduce Mr. Thanosis, who is the Deputy Director General and Head of HQ Unit Invest Cyprus and the Cyprus representative to the ISO TC 322. Mr. Thanosis is the Deputy Director General at the Cyprus Investment Promotion Agency and is also a board member of the European Fund and Asset Management Association, as well as the Cyprus Investment Funds Association. He has more than 24 years of international corporate experience, with 12 years in the International Banking and Financial Services Group, Société Générale, where he served at various key posts. Mr. Thanosis, please.
Hello, thank you, Natalie. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfect.
Great, thank you very much. A great thank you for our distinguished speakers. Especially to Peter, Mike, and Hayden for the great work over the last 3 years. And thanks to CYS for organizing things today. I won't be long. I would just say a few things on how you can get involved as participants and interested stakeholders. And then we'll give the chance for the Q&A. Who are the stakeholders in this sustainable finance standard? Stakeholders involved in the field of sustainable finance include those participating in the global financial ecosystem from both the supply side as well as the demand side of the market. Moving forward, if we can see at the local level in Cyprus, who could possibly participate and where should to participate, is very important to have a team of experts together with CYS. We have investment-related organizations. We have banking, financial services, asset management, investment funds, insurance organizations, intermediaries, public market exchange places, supervisory bodies. It's very important, and I highlight here the Central Bank and the Cyprus Securities and Exchange Commission, the ministries, the governmental organizations, professional bodies, CIFA, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, the Cyprus Bar Associations, Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Federation of Industrialists and Employers, and other stakeholders, NGOs, trade unions. Actually, it concerns each and every one of us. And I'd like to highlight here that never before has our planet and we as people stood before a number of scale-up man-made challenges as we face today. Real change is needed, not just from politicians and businesses, but from each and every one of us. Without understanding the situation and without developing a deeper awareness about the lives we are living and the consequences they have in our planet, such changes are unlikely to occur. If we want to deliver a planet which is healthy for our children, for the future generations, sustainable finance standard provides a tool for the future. And it's very important to work with this tool and try to do whatever we can for the future generations. Moving forward, we have seen the map by the earlier speaker, so we go to the next slide. Now, ways to get involved in Cyprus. You need to go through the CYS, which is the organization responsible for standards. It's important to take part in the draft for sustainable finance. It's a learning process with a lot to learn, and also network with leading personalities internationally in the matter of sustainable finance, ESG, and UN SDGs. And the ISO TC 322 convenes experts, as already said by our esteemed speakers, from across the financial community, and includes extensive internal and external liaisons to take expertise. Next slide, please. I would like to close with a saying of Mahatma Gandhi: "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not enough for every man's greed." Thank you very much for being here, and back to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thanosis, and thank you everyone for your contributions. We now have come on to the Q&A session. I can ask the speakers the various questions that you've raised through the Q&A platform. Considering that we've had an awful lot of questions, I think it's unlikely we'll get everything addressed today online. We'll try definitely to do so, but we'll endeavor to do so by correspondence afterwards. In the meantime, we would appreciate if you wish to provide your feedback on the 5 questions shown through the poll feature that will now appear on your screens. So we have attempted to sort of group some of your questions. There are quite a lot about whether the standard is applicable to all companies within the finance sector. And for example, whether the standard is applicable to insurance, banking, forex, investment type of companies. Mr. Morgan, can you please shed some light onto this question, please?
Yes, thank you, Natalie, and thanks for the question. Just before I address that specific point, I've had a few other questions as well come through me in the Q&A and the chat facility, just to underline that we will attempt to get back to you, but it may be in writing afterwards. So I can't address each and every one that's been sent through. And if there's any sort of technical questions on the standard itself, I think it's probably best to direct those through CYS. But in terms of application through different organizational types, it is fairly generic in application. And I would say that elements of it will be applicable to most organizations in the financial services sector. And you can apply various aspects of the whole standard or part of the standard for your organization. But it is of most relevant, I would say, to for example, institutional investors, fund managers, those that are investing in asset management, those sort of activities, rather than directly applicable 100% to some of these supporting institutions as well. But there probably is something for everyone in the standard itself, especially in terms of the good practice guidance. So that's how I respond to that one. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you. Dr. Young, would you like to add on to this question?
Thank you. Just a little to say, again, what I was saying about us providing some sort of consensus around standard making. I think it's really important that this standard is applicable across the whole sort of ecosystem, because what we're lacking at the moment, I think, is consistency across the different silos that the economy operates on. And we think we have an opportunity to bridge across those silos, and we think that's enormously important to achieve the objectives of the transition for mainstream finance to sustainability. I think that's all I would add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another question, which is quite a recurring one, is on whether companies can get certified by meeting the principles specified in the ISO 32210 standard, and how is this standard related to management system standards such as ISO 9001? Mr. Morgan, would you be able to address this question, please?
Yep, thanks, Natalie. So there is some guidance in the standard around assurance, and although it's not a mandatory requirement, it is highly recommended. So the standard is a framework standard. It's not designed as a certification standard, albeit it does follow some of the key sort of architecture around, for example, 9001 in terms of quality. But the assurance element of it is for a third party to provide that validation of the implementation of the principles, and in terms of the veracity or the accuracy of any disclosures and reports made from the organization. So there is an element there, but it's not designed, as I say, as a certification standard. Hence, it can be more broadly applied in terms of a principle focused standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Young.
Maybe just to add a little to that, and also pick up on other question I see has come in about the 26,000 standard on the social element of organizations. So first to say, I think as Hayden says, this is very much a framework standard. The other work we have in our pipeline will be more specific and more designed to allow specific assurance processes to take place. And as an example, the joint work that we've carried out with another committee, the Environment Management Committee 207, on green debt instruments, that is a standard ISO 1430 parts 1 to 4, and one of those parts specifically addresses an assurance process. So as Hayden says, there's a consistency in the architecture of these things, but generally the object of this particular standard is at a framework level. When we get into more detailed elements, it's much more easier to specify an assurance process, which we agree is very important to deal with the risks of greenwashing, and is certainly a key objective of many standards. Just to link that also into the other existing standards like 26,000 on the social impact of organizations. This is a very widely used standard. What is it that's different? Well, what's different with our standard is, firstly, it is addressing the financial sector specifically and not just all organizations. And secondly, it is addressing the whole of sustainability, in other words, all of ESG together, not just the S. So just as we have an environmental management standard in ISO 14000, and we have a social and we have a governance standard, these specifically address organizations to those practices. But what we are doing is looking at the sustainable outcomes. So these are the consequence of good ESG practices within organizations in delivering their financial investments. I hope that may help. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you both. Some questions submitted are on whether the ISO 32210 can assist companies deal and respond to the increasing dangers of corporate greenwashing. And along the same lines, there are some questions on whether green bonds are addressed in the ISO 32210. Mr. Morgan, can you please assist here?
Yep, thank you, Natalie. So in terms of greenwashing and measures taken to avoid that is one of the core premises of design of the standard, in terms of adding clarity and transparency and a robust mechanism to avoid whether it's deliberate or inadvertent greenwashing. So that was one of the key premises of design of the standard, and hopefully successful implementation by organizations of the standard will address any greenwashing risks, or at least reduce the risk of greenwashing, because it is that added element of transparency. On the green bonds question, I think Peter's actually just mentioned 14,030, which is the ISO series for green debt instruments. So the Sustainable Finance Framework Standard doesn't specifically reference green bonds or green debt, but it does reference products and services, but it keeps it quite generic in terms of application of how that's interpreted by the organization. But I would reference, if there is any interest in green bonds, and it was mentioned actually earlier in opening comments, then the ISO series 14,030 is specifically designed around green debt instruments or and green bonds. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on, there is a question from the implementation perspective in regards to this standard. What and how can companies gain from it? Mr. Thanosis,
yes, thank you.
Help us here? Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. I think it was also covered before by the previous speakers in the presentations, but just to highlight a few benefits for the companies once they implement the sustainable finance standard and have products that would consider the sustainable finance standard. I would say it supports, of course, the profitability, as well as it enhances the risk management, and also there is clarity and transparency, It provides confidence and reassures to the market participants. These are some of the advantages that at the end of the day, it will help companies. There are, of course, more. Now, I would like to ask either Peter or Hayden to add any comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. Maybe I can come in there. Yeah, I absolutely endorse all you say there. Maybe just to give a little international perspective as well on this. The benefits are that we are also providing a much more common language on what represents sustainable finance. This is enormously important. This has actually been a big part of the consequence of the activities of TC 322. With the contributions of all of the national members, it was clear at the start that the expectations and definitions around sustainable finance were quite different in different jurisdictions, and that was a real friction to the movement of capital to sustainable projects because of a mixed expectation between perhaps the source of the capital and the deployment of it. So that's one reason why we published that terminology guide last year, was to provide over 100 terms with their, if you like, best practice definitions, which we believe most promote a global consensus around what sustainability is. So one benefit that companies get is they can trade and carry out their work internationally with a much more common understanding and with expectations being matched across international boundaries. And just one other thing to say as well, which is there is a huge uplift. I'm sure it's part of the reason to welcome so many of you to this seminar, an interest in sustainable finance and a desire to deliver ESG investment vehicles. But there is also a limit at the moment of the reliable information which allows you to decide what represents a sustainable outcome, what is a appropriate member, if you like, of the sustainable finance community. And so having this framework will also help companies to be clear that they are part of the true sustainable finance community and can qualify for ESG and sustainable finance badged investment vehicles and those organizations that aggregate or report or track sustainable investments. I think this is enormously important because at the moment it is quite a woolly definition. And of course, we also have regulatory driven definitions such as the European Union's work, particularly their work on taxonomy, which has been quite controversial because of the difficulty in getting agreement amongst all of the member states regarding what should be included and what shouldn't be included. This framework would be a good way for companies to perhaps sidestep that kind of controversy by adopting their own practices aligned with this framework approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is another question. I think we have already addressed it, but we could reiterate it, please. When the standard is expected to be in effect, and at what level do you see statutory auditors to get involved prior or when in effect? Mr. Morgan, would you be able to assist us on this one, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I say, the draft standard is out for consultation now, and we would definitely welcome comments around that. And just to mention also, any sort of comments with the standard, we've received a few in Q&A. It's probably best to go up through CYS in terms of that formal submission. And then we hope to publish the standard as a full international standard in the autumn of this year. So that's when it will be fully in sort of use. However, I would say that even now, I think there's an urgency, as Peter sort of mentioned, and as mentioned by Mrs. Picky in opening comments, to integrate these principles. So you don't need to wait necessarily until the full standard is published. to integrate some of the key principles and implement some of the key good practice recommendations, because I can't imagine it's going to change in any material form between the draft and the full publication. So I would definitely endorse, taking a look, consider how it may influence your organization or your client's organization, and consider, implementation of the good practice there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add on to this one. Okay, there is another question on whether the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards, are included in the repository.
Okay, I've maybe come in, and actually this is an opportunity perhaps just to explain. This is one of the areas which I think most confounds people in this fast-moving area, is all of these acronyms and organizations. So the SASB is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. It's a foundation, and it was a category A liaison of our committee right from the beginning. So the first thing to say is that the expertise and the long-term experience of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board has been drawn on in drafting up this standard, and indeed in all of the work that we have within TC 322. But in July 2021, SASB merged with the International Integrated Reporting Council, that's the IIRC, to form the Value Reporting Foundation. And I'm explaining this slowly because this is where everyone gets lost. So the VRF is now the current body, if you like, within which SASB exists. But it doesn't stop there. With the announcement last November of this International Sustainability Standards Board, which was announced by the IFRS Foundation, that's the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, which is also responsible for the International Accounting Standards Board, which is the most frequently used international measure for the delivery of company accounts. The IFRS have announced that this ISSB, this International Sustainability Standards Board, will bring together as many of these different bodies that were all trying to produce similar solutions. And as a result, it has been announced that this Value Reporting Foundation in itself, including the SASB, together with the International Accounting now I've lost it. There's the ISSB and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Boards and the VRF are all going into the ISSB. So the International Sustainability Standards Board going forward is the organization that you need to track. If you track that, then you will pick up all of the historical information and activities that these organizations have. And the objective is to continue that consensus building process. Where does ISO sit on this? ISO is different because we have a broader remit than this specific accounting standards structure, but we are very interested in making a continuum between what the ISSB produce in their own standards and what we produce. And that is where the repository idea comes in, that we are producing frameworks and broad methodologies which are drilled down in much greater detail by the work that the ISSB will do. I probably nearly got that very clear for you, but it was something I wanted to mention because I know that these acronyms are one of the barriers to engagement in this area because it is a very complicated and fast changing landscape. So I hope that's helped a little. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm not sure if anyone else would like to add on to this question. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is how are the principles and practices set out by the ISO 32210 standard different from the European taxonomy regulation, the EU corporate sustainability reporting and FRD and other similar ones. I guess another one similar to this one is whether the standard is aligned with the European taxonomy, EU corporate sustainability reporting and other similar regulations. who can assist me on this one, please?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I can maybe have first go at
Thank
that. Yeah, so as I mentioned in my comments there, so this standard has been designed to accommodate all the different regional, whether that's EU or other region regulation or initiatives, including the EU taxonomy, the non-financial disclosure regs, TCFD, the sustainable finance disclosure regs, because these are specific requirements, whether it's at the organizational level or at the product level or at the activity level. And the standard itself will provide that framework to enable compliance with all those different regulations. So that's why it's very consistent with and compatible, and will help facilitate implementation and adoption and compliance with the other regulation. So there's absolutely no conflict whatsoever. And like I say, this if you implement the principles and processes and good practice within the standard itself, it will help support compliance and disclosure in alignment with those regulations. Thanks.
Maybe just to add as well, that's exactly right, as Hayden says. So the only thing here where you get a difference is the jurisdiction definitions that are being adopted, as we're seeing in Europe with a specific taxonomy. Now, I think it's important to understand the taxonomy is there to support the specific European regulations. It is not there to support a generic international process for sustainable finance, as our standard is. So as Hayden says, following all of those processes and practices will assure, if you like, the compliance and the eligibility, but the regulatory definition of what it is in and out is something that is a matter for each jurisdiction to define. And there are in fact quite a number of taxonomies being developed in different regions and countries at the moment, and these will not align exactly. And one of the reasons they will not align is because the important thing is for each country to be put on the sustainable transition. And that journey starts from a different place according to which country you're in. And so the definition of what today is within one taxonomy of what defines sustainable and another in another jurisdiction will be different. And it's okay for that to be different. What doesn't change is the direction of travel. And what this standard does is it puts people in the right direction of travel towards a sustainable outcome. And if they adopt that, they are traveling in the right direction. They will still have to look at their own national regulations to see where they fit, whether they qualify within particular regulations or not, because that is a matter for each jurisdiction and for regulators to define. But they will be put on the right path, if you like, by following the standard. And that, if you like, is the ISO approach that enables us to form international consensus around outcomes without being hamstrung by the idiosyncrasies sometimes of individual national regulations and definitions.
Excellent, thank you very much. Another question is, once the standard gets published, how can companies get engaged?
Well, I have a first go there. Well, the simple answer, I guess, is that once it is published, then it is available. I'm afraid it's not a free source. ISO, I believe, runs its organization on the basis of actually selling its standards. So there is a fee to pay to be able to obtain that standard. So a little hint is to get involved with us directly, and you will see what's coming without the pain of having to buy it. But that is probably an advert that's illegal for ISO, but it's a very good way of getting involved in the processes. But once it's there, it is a published standard. But of course, our committee will continue on. So those that are engaged with us, and those of you who get engaged with Marius and with with CYS, will be able to continue to give feedback, and we would expect to have effectively a standing committee which will look at feedback from the application of this standard, from the use, from the experience, from ideas for improvements, and as Hayden has mentioned, we're hoping to have some kind of more real-time sort of good practice repository. So there'll also be the opportunity to provide suggestions of information that we might want to also promote to help people to achieve best practice. So that, I think, is the answer that I can give. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
Okay, great, thank you. I see there are some comments on the draft already, and on particular lines even, and they're being very specific on some questions on the draft, which is very promising. As we can see, the participants have already started contributing to the comments procedure, which is excellent news. We will definitely get back to you on the specific questions that you have on the draft ISO standard 32210 once we complete the webinar. I believe there are no more other questions at this point. So I'm going to wrap up by saying two things. On behalf of CYS, we would like to say a warm thank you to our speakers who shared their expertise with us today. A big thank you also goes to all of you, our participants, for joining us today. Soon, we will provide you with all the information that has been presented. And the second point we would like to raise is to encourage all of you to make comments on the draft ISO standard 32210 sustainable finance, since in doing so, you also contribute in reaching our sustainability goals in finance. On behalf of CYS, we hope you found it informative, and please feel free to get in touch if you wish to hear more on this subject matter. Thank you very much, and goodbye from all of us.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.